You're joking, right? My voice cracked as I stared at my empty savings account. Everything I'd worked for, gone. My name is Lena Torres, and I had spent years scraping together $24,000 for a down payment on my first home. Long shifts, no vacations, cheap groceries, I did everything right. But my mother Carmen and her husband Rick. They drained my account to fund their lavish anniversary gala. Not a word to me. Just smug smiles and shrugs when I confronted them. We're family, they said. You'll get over it. But I wouldn't. And I didn't. That was the moment I stopped being their doormat and started becoming something else entirely. My name is Lena Torres. I'm 29 years old, and up until that week, I still believed my sacrifices would eventually pay off. I've worked as a medical billing specialist since I was 20. I lived frugally, no takeout, no new clothes unless absolutely necessary, and every bonus went straight into my savings. That account represented freedom. A home I could call mine. Something no one could take from me. Except they did. My mom and Rick had always been financially reckless. Rick liked to play the successful businessman, but really he was a glorified regional manager who leased luxury cars he couldn't afford and wore designer suits on credit. Carmen, my mother, was always more concerned about appearances than stability. Hosting parties, buying overpriced antiques, making sure the neighbors knew we were doing well. Meanwhile, I was the one quietly covering their behind on late mortgage payments. Fixing the plumbing when they couldn't afford a repairman. I thought they appreciated it. I was so wrong. It was Carmen's 25th wedding anniversary with Rick. She wanted a memorable celebration. A night to prove we've made it. I didn't attend, I had work, and honestly, I was burned out from years of enabling them. But I found out about the theft the following Monday when I logged in to check my account balance before transferring funds to a real estate agent. I froze. My account had been wiped clean. Every single cent gone. I confronted them at their house, my heart pounding, my throat dry. Carmen was sipping coffee like it was any other morning, scrolling on her phone. Rick was in the backyard, watering plants like he hadn't just shattered my entire future. When I demanded answers, they didn't even pretend to deny it. We borrowed it, Carmen said flatly. For the party. Rick needed a down payment for the venue. We'll pay it back. I stared at her, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. You broke into my account. You've always said we're family, she replied coolly. What's the big deal? You've got a good job, you'll make it back. Rick strolled in, grinning. It was a fantastic party. Everyone said it was the event of the year. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You stole from me. Rick snorted. Don't be dramatic. It's not like you're out on the street. My voice was shaking with rage. I was going to buy a house. That money was everything to me. Well, maybe it's a sign, Carmen said, standing up. You're young. Don't tie yourself down with a mortgage. Live a little. The lack of remorse, the casual arrogance, burned me. That's when it hit me. They didn't see me as a daughter. I was a resource. A safety net. An ATM they could manipulate with guilt and family ties. And I'd let them. But no more. I walked out of that house, my fists clenched, and I made a promise to myself, they would regret this. For years, I let the little things slide. Family emergencies always seemed to involve my money. A busted water heater here, a late insurance premium there. Carmen had a way of calling me at the worst possible times, finals week, job interviews, during my lunch break at work, and dropping her voice into that guilty tremble that always made me feel like a bad daughter for even hesitating. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious, Mija. I used to believe her. Used to think she needed me. That I was the glue holding our broken little family together. But this was theft. Carmen had used an old joint authorization to access the account. Something I'd stupidly agreed to back when I was 22 and too naive to think my own mother might exploit me. Dad had passed the year before, cancer. Quick and cruel. Before he died, he made me promise to take care of her. Back then, I thought it meant bringing her groceries or driving her to doctor's appointments. Not giving her carte blanche access to my future. I should have revoked it. I thought about it so many times. But every time I'd come close, she'd say something like, "Your father would be so proud of how responsible you are," and I'd let it go. Like an idiot. Now, every dollar was gone. I sat on the floor of my apartment, still in my work scrubs, staring at my laptop screen, my eyes red and dry. Then I called Nia. Nia had been my best friend since community college. She knew all about Carmen and Rick, called them the scammers when she was in a generous mood. She picked up on the first ring. "What's wrong?" She took it, I said quietly. "All of it. 24,000. Gone." There was silence, and then Nia exploded. "That be, Lena. Tell me you're calling the cops. Tell me you're finally gonna burn them to the ground." I don't know." "Yes, you do," she said fiercely. "This isn't an accident. It's not a misunderstanding. She stole from you. This is the line. This is where it ends." And Nia was right. I'd always fantasized about finally cutting them off. Telling them to go to hell and slamming the door behind me. But deep down, I'd never had the nerve. Not until now. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about the years of being overlooked, ignored, used. I took a deep breath. "Do you know a lawyer?" "I know a beast," Nia said without missing a beat. "Her name's Tasha Blake. Family law and financial crimes. I'll text you her number right now." I called Tasha that same evening. Her voice was clipped and direct, but not unkind. "You understand that pursuing this could fracture your relationship permanently," she said after I explained everything. "Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Carmen's smug smile. Rick's dismissive shrug. "I am." "Good," she said. "Let's start with the paper trail. Send me every screenshot, every transaction log. And get your bank on the phone. We need documentation of the withdrawal and who accessed the account." It felt surreal, like I was narrating someone else's story. But the more I talked, the more that hollow, aching space in my chest started to fill. With clarity. With purpose. Filing a police report felt terrifying and exhilarating. I expected judgment or disbelief. Instead, the officer at the precinct took my statement calmly, asked concise questions, and nodded when I showed him the joint authorization and the transaction dates. "So you never gave her verbal permission to use the funds for this event?" he asked. "No," I said firmly. "Absolutely not." He handed me a case number and said they'd follow up within the week. I walked out of the precinct into the fading twilight, the air cool against my skin. And for the first time in years, I felt power. It wasn't just about pressing charges. It was about finally saying out loud, "You don't get to do this to me. You don't get to steal from me and call it love." Tasha was relentless. Within 2 days, she'd contacted my bank, flagged the unauthorized withdrawal, and drafted a formal cease and desist letter addressed to both Carmen and Rick. "This isn't just a demand for repayment," she told me. "We're going to hit them where it hurts. Financially. Legally. Publicly, if it comes to that." I sent the letter certified mail. Nia came over that night with wine and frozen pizza, and we sat on the couch rereading the legal jargon, giggling like teenagers every time we hit a particularly scathing paragraph. Carmen and Rick laughed when they received the demand letter. Actually laughed. "You're really going to sue your own mother," she said over voicemail, her voice thick with fake concern and real condescension. "What's gotten into you, Lena?" Rick's message was worse: "Take us to court. You'll be laughed out of the room." So I did. I forwarded both voicemails to Tasha, who responded with a dry, "Excellent. They're giving us gold." We compiled everything. Every bank statement, every transaction. The withdrawal from my savings had Carmen's digital signature on it. And then, the cherry on top, Dad's handwritten will, scanned into a PDF I'd kept on my desktop for years. It clearly stated the inheritance was to be placed in an account under my sole management. He'd even included a paragraph about his wish that Carmen respect Lena's independence and future. That part hit hard. Tasha also found the photos from the party, full-color proof of the gala that my stolen down payment funded. Champagne towers. Ice sculptures. Rick on a rented yacht deck in a white tux, Carmen in a floor-length gown that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. They had flaunted their theft on social media. Hashtag 25 years strong. Hashtag family first. Idiots, Tasha muttered, sliding the photos into our case binder. Do they not know how screenshots work? Mediation was scheduled within 6 weeks. That morning, I wore my best blazer, the one I usually reserved for interviews, and pulled my hair back into a clean twist. I wanted to look like everything they'd underestimated. Confident. Prepared. Dangerous. We arrived 10 minutes early. Carmen and Rick strolled in late, dressed like they were attending a Sunday brunch. Carmen wore a floral wrap dress and large sunglasses she refused to remove. Rick was in a golf shirt. They didn't greet me. The mediator, a woman named Barbara with an air of quiet authority, introduced herself and explained the process. "We'll review the documentation, then discuss possible resolution options before escalating to civil court." Rick leaned back in his chair. "This is a waste of time." Barbara gave him a cool look. "Then you should have handled this privately." I smiled slightly. Tasha started us off. She laid out the entire timeline, beginning with the unauthorized withdrawal and Carmen's misuse of the joint authorization, followed by the inheritance clause in Dad's will, then the party expenditures backed by photo evidence and payment logs. She presented receipts, bank transfers, Carmen's text messages, and even an email Rick had sent bragging about how impressive the party budget was. With every document, I watched the smugness fade from their faces. Carmen's arms slowly folded across her chest. Rick's knee started bouncing under the table. Tasha's closing statement was simple. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was exploitation. Barbara nodded and turned to Carmen and Rick. "You've had a chance to review the evidence. Do you dispute these transactions or the misuse of the account?" Rick started. "We didn't think she'd actually." "That's not an answer," Barbara interrupted. Carmen sighed loudly. "Fine. We used the money. But she's acting like we robbed a bank." Tasha leaned forward. "You robbed her. Your own daughter." Barbara tapped her pen. "You have 2 choices. Agree to repay the full amount within a structured timeline, or we move forward with civil litigation. Given the clear evidence of financial misappropriation, there is also potential for criminal charges." Silence. I turned to them, my voice calm but resolute. "You will repay every cent. Or I'll see you in court, and I'll make sure every detail goes public. You'll be explaining to your HOA and your Facebook friends why your gala was funded with stolen inheritance money." Carmen's jaw clenched. Rick rubbed the back of his neck. "This is blackmail," he muttered. "No," I said. "This is justice." Tasha slid a repayment plan across the table. "You have 48 hours to agree." For a long moment, they just sat there. Carmen looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. The old Lena, the one who apologized for everything, who flinched at raised voices, was gone. Replaced by someone who'd finally stopped caring about keeping the peace. They signed. Barbara confirmed the agreement and ended the session. Rick left without looking at me. Carmen lingered. Her eyes searched mine for some sign of weakness. Regret. But I gave her nothing. You really think this makes you strong? She said quietly. No, I replied. But it makes me free. As we walked out of the building, Tasha clapped me on the back. Well played. I smiled, the weight in my chest finally lifting. I had turned the tables, and they knew it. The first payment came on the 1st of the month. Exactly $2,000 deposited into my account via bank transfer, just like the agreement outlined. Tasha had insisted we set up an escrow account, just in case they tried to play games. But they didn't. Not yet. Every month, like clockwork, the money landed. And every time it did, I stared at the transaction line and whispered, good. Not because it was about the money, not anymore. It was about what it stood for. Boundaries. Consequences. Respect. The old me would have looked at that deposit with guilt, with worry. Wondering if I was being too harsh. Wondering if they were struggling. But the new me. I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. Because I wasn't the obedient daughter anymore. I wasn't the fixer. I wasn't the pushover who bailed them out when they overspent or played victim when their lies caught up with them. I was Lena Torres, a woman who drew a line and defended it. And Carmen didn't know what to do with that. She started calling again about 2 months after mediation. At first, it was casual. Just checking in, she'd say. Wanted to see how you're doing. I kept my voice flat. Civil, but firm. I'm well, thanks. She'd fish. You're seeing anyone these days? Still working at that clinic? I gave her short answers. Unemotional. Factual. It drove her nuts. Then she tried a new tactic, guilt. I miss when we used to have coffee together. Don't you? I don't, I said simply. Those conversations usually ended with you asking for money. Silence. I heard her exhale sharply. I'm just trying to connect. No, I said. You're trying to reset the rules. But they've changed. She didn't call for a while after that. And honestly, I didn't miss her. It felt strange at first, this space I'd carved between us. For so long, my identity had been tied to how well I could manage other people's chaos. Carmen's moods. Rick's schemes. Their endless spiral of poor decisions I'd been expected to fix. But now, with that space came clarity. Peace. I started filling my weekends with things I'd once put off. I joined a ceramics class on Sundays. I found a therapist and started unpacking years of emotional exhaustion I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I even toured a few condos, slowly letting myself imagine again, about building a life on my own terms. No shared walls with people who saw me as a wallet. No compromise for their comfort. It wasn't fast. Healing never is. But every step forward felt like a small, quiet victory. I replaced the old couch in my apartment with one I actually liked, soft teal, with wide armrests and deep cushions. A little indulgent, maybe, but it was mine. Paid for with money Carmen and Rick never thought they'd have to give back. The irony made me smile every time I sank into it. And that smile? That was new. Nia noticed it first. We were sitting on the couch one Saturday afternoon, drinking iced coffee and watching terrible reality TV, when she said, "You look lighter." I raised an eyebrow. Lighter? Yeah, she said. Like you're not carrying their drama on your back anymore. It suits you. I laughed, genuinely. Feels good. It did. Because every cent reclaimed, every boundary upheld, it was more than justice. It was protection. Of my peace. My future. Myself. Even Tasha, who had seen it all before, said, "You're one of my favorite clients, Lena." I blinked. Seriously? I'm barely out of the beginner's revenge league. She smiled. It's not about the drama. It's about the transformation. You came in doubting whether you had the right to defend yourself. Now look at you. I shrugged. Guess I got tired of shrinking. She raised her coffee cup in a toast. To never shrinking again. So I raised mine too. And we toasted to the version of me that no longer let guilt dictate her decisions. To the woman who walked away from manipulation and chose self-respect instead. To the Lena who finally knew her worth, and wasn't afraid to enforce it. Half a year later, I stood across the street from a small, sunlit house on the edge of Asheville, modest, imperfect, but mine. Pale yellow siding, a crooked little porch, and wild rose bushes that looked like they had survived on pure stubbornness. I felt a quiet kinship with those roses. It wasn't the dream home I imagined 5 years ago, but somehow, it was better. Real. Earned. A place that would hold only what I brought into it, no borrowed chaos, no inherited guilt. Just me. The money was coming together. Slowly, but steadily. Thanks to my job as a medical tech supervisor, the weekend freelance chart audits I picked up, and yes, the monthly repayments from Carmen and Rick. As of this month, they'd returned $12,000, half of what they stole. My loan officer said that with a strong letter of intent and the consistent deposit trail, I was well positioned for pre-approval. I ran a hand over the edge of the "for sale" sign, already envisioning where I'd put a small garden bench and maybe some lavender by the mailbox. The realtor was meeting me in 20 minutes. But I had arrived early on purpose. To breathe. To acknowledge the moment. To remember the fight it took to get here. Of course, Carmen had tried to wriggle free. 2 months ago, she left me a voicemail that started with, "Lena, don't you think it's time we moved past this?" and ended with, "I miss having my daughter in my life." I didn't reply. A week later, Rick called to discuss the payment schedule. He wanted to reduce the monthly amount. Said it was strangling their finances. I suggested he sell one of his leased SUVs. He hung up. Tasha drafted a formal warning. Any attempt to default or renegotiate would be considered a breach of agreement and referred to civil court immediately. They didn't try again. That was the beauty of boundaries. Once you built them strong enough, you didn't have to shout. You could just point to the fence and say, "No further." I hadn't spoken to either of them in nearly 3 months. And I didn't miss it. The silence wasn't sad, it was clean. I'd scrubbed their noise out of my life and replaced it with peace. The house reminded me of Dad. Not because he had ever seen it, but because everything it stood for came from him. He taught me to save, to plan, to stand on my own. He was practical and tender, a man who built shelves out of scrap wood and told me that fair doesn't always mean easy. I used to think he left too much responsibility on me. Now I understood, he trusted me to know right from wrong, to recognize when something had to change. He would have been proud. Not just of the house, but of the woman I became to fight for it. A woman who no longer flinched when someone raised their voice. A woman who didn't confuse love with self-erasure. A woman who finally learned that protecting your peace sometimes means walking away from the people who demand it most. When the realtor pulled up, I greeted her with a smile. She unlocked the front door and waved me inside. It smelled like dust and potential. The wood floors creaked just enough to feel like home. The kitchen was small, but had a window above the sink that overlooked the backyard. I imagined coffee mornings and lazy Sundays, a shelf full of mugs I actually liked. "You like it?" the realtor asked. I turned slowly in the empty living room and nodded. "Yeah. I really do." We went over numbers again, and she showed me a quiet confidence I hadn't seen in past meetings. "You're almost there," she said. "Another couple of months at this rate, and we'll have your offer ready." I didn't cry. I thought maybe I would. But instead, I just smiled. Steady and whole. Back at my apartment that evening, I pulled up the repayment schedule and checked off the latest installment. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need them to admit they were wrong. The repayments were their confession. Their signature on every deposit said everything they never would. And me? I was finally building something that no one else could take. Brick by brick. Dollar by dollar. Step by step. For once, justice didn't look like a courtroom scene or a big dramatic moment. It looked like a small house on a quiet street. A cup of tea in a kitchen with light streaming in. It looked like dignity, and safety, and knowing I'd never again let someone treat me like less than I was worth. I sat back on my couch and glanced at my phone. A text from Nia popped up. "When are we painting that porch swing?" I smiled and replied, "Soon. Real soon." Because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning.